Good morning, everybody. Welcome to SIT. My name is Thomas. I run product strategy at Lansweeper. Lansweeper is a technology asset intelligence platform. We help organizations by gathering all of the information that you can think of about their technology estate. We then aggregate that with other technology estates around the world so that you can benchmark. And then we blend that with other information and other contexts from the rest of your ecosystem so that you can ask the right information and the right questions about your estate and make better, faster, smarter decisions. Now, that is the last you're going to hear me speak of Lansweeper today. I have attended a lot of these talks in the past, and if I'm totally honest, I hate it when people try and sell you products and services. I've been known to heckle, so if you hear me try and sell the product, please heckle. Today we're going to be speaking about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a part of my career that I've spent most of my time in. I've done about 15 years focusing primarily on offensive cybersecurity, so penetration testing, red teaming, vulnerability management. Prior to Lansweeper, I ran a team of about 100 consultants over at IBM, delivering penetration testing, red teaming, social engineering, vulnerability management. And then after that, I created a cybersecurity product, which Lansweeper then acquired, and that's how I'm here today, standing in front of you. So today we're going to be talking about integrating cybersecurity into IT service management. If some of you were here at SITS last year, you may have seen my previous presentation, and you will recognize this slide. What I like to do when I give a presentation about cybersecurity is I like to talk about the growing kind of trends, the trajectory of cybersecurity. And I think that everybody can appreciate that different people have different ways of seeing, that there is a problem. Some people care about the monetary aspect of it, the commercial side, and other people care about the technical side. And what I try to do with these two charts is I try to kind of blend the two together. So on the left-hand side, you will see from the IBM Cost of a Data Breach report. This is a report that IBM create every year using all of the incident response investigations that they do, plus some publicly accessible information as well. They try to basically pinpoint how much does it cost for an organization to deal with a data breach. Now, please don't look at that 4.88 million and think, my company doesn't even make that much if you work for a small company. The problem is scalable. The thing that I want you to focus on here is the trend going up, right? And other than in 2020, when the world was a crazy place anyway, every single year the cost of the data breach is going upwards. Now, on the right-hand side, we then have the technical aspect. We're looking at the number of CVEs that are released every year. Now, note that this graph here on the right, it isn't cumulative. It's basically every year the number of CVEs. The CVE stands for Common Vulnerability Exposure. It is a known vulnerability that is catalogued. You may have heard of CVEs recently due to whether the US government were going to continue to fund the cataloguing of this or not. Now, since the 90s, we've been creating and curating this list of vulnerabilities. And basically, these vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities that are known and can be utilized against organizations today. Now, not all CVEs are equal. We talked about that last year. I talked about how prioritizing vulnerabilities is incredibly important. But the fact of the matter is if you look at last year and you see 40,000 potential vulnerabilities, and then if you look at this year, and there's probably, I didn't check this morning, but I imagine there's probably about 19,000 released CVEs now for the year. We're going to surpass 40,000. The more and more vulnerabilities, the more potential there is for an attack. And then when you think back to the commercial side, that the increase of a data breach, the cost of it is increasing, this is a problem that we need to, I say deal with. We can't deal with it. It's a cat and mouse game, but it's a problem that we need to focus on. It's a problem that we need to think about. It's a problem that we need to prioritize within the business. And that's why I'm here talking today. So, last year, I focused on the connection between vulnerability management, so a core component of cybersecurity, and IT asset management. But this year we're going to kind of shift focus. Now, the key message last year was that data matters. I wanted to talk about how you need to utilize the data that comes from all parts of your business to help your business thrive. You need to understand the assets you've got, you need to understand the context that they're in so that you can prioritize better, that you can make better decisions. And ultimately, in that example that I was giving last year, where we went deep into vulnerability and asset prioritization, it was all about ensuring that you could do effective remediation better. It was about bridging together two different sides of the business to ensure that you can help security teams and IT teams with the visibility that they need to reduce risk. Now this year we're broadening the focus slightly. We're going to move over to ITSM, but we're going to talk about cybersecurity more holistically. We're going to be still grounded in data, but it's all about ensuring that we look at the ITSM processes. Specifically, what I want to do is I want to look at where people interact with IT. That's what I want to talk about, and you'll see why in a moment. It's about those core workflows of IT. It's about ensuring that we keep IT running. It's all about ensuring that by embedding security thinking into the way in which we deal with process, how this can help reduce risk, improve response, and make security really a natural part of the process. And it's about ensuring that we don't overcomplicate things. And it's a really important point. I'm going to be totally honest with you. When I walked in this morning, I was quite shocked after some conversations I had last year with a bunch of vendors here. I think you'll remember the term cloud washing. Like I definitely think that AI has become an incredibly big topic of conversation this year. And look, don't get me wrong, I think AI is great. Like I use it every day. But just like if you hired somebody and asked them to do a job and they left, you would want to understand what it was that they did so that you could pass it on to the next person. I genuinely believe that we're empowering like AI to do things that we just don't understand. And that might be fine for the future, but like right now, as we're building AI and as we're utilizing AI more and more, we need to understand the context and the process and the things that need to be done. Because quite frankly, as I showed in that first slide, we don't know how to solve this problem right now. So it's not just about throwing something at it and actually getting it to work. So this presentation, I'm not going to be talking about anything complicated. I'm not going to be talking about AI. I can talk to you about AI all you want, right? It's literally my life at the moment when it comes to like work and strategy. But this presentation, I have a firm belief that we are not doing the fundamentals right. And it's about the fundamentals. It's about doing the things that need to be done. And then, yeah, you can throw AI at the mix, but make sure you understand what needs to be done before you throw AI into the mix. So when we think about security, it can be very easy to think very first at like the technical controls. So I'm talking like firewalls, antiviruses, vulnerability scanning, vulnerability management, but this is just part of the picture, right? Like we always talk about people, process, technology when we talk about IT, cyber, and lots of different other things. And today what I want to talk about is the people and the process, because the process is where the day-to-day happens. It's where the workflows occur. It's about how you guide and like manage things like incidents, change, and access. And those are the three areas that we'll talk about specifically. Now, a bunch of my ex-colleagues will probably laugh at me when I say this because they won't agree. But having now worked for a company like Lansweeper for a few years, I do genuinely believe it. Security without process is chaotic. Being a penetration tester in the past, it was completely chaotic. That was my life. I was basically thriving and getting excited off breaking things and causing problems for people. But it is chaotic because there's no structure to apply the controls that we know that we need to put into place. But process without security, well, yeah, don't get me wrong, it's 10 times more efficient, I'm sure. You're going to move super fast and things are going to feel great, but it's vulnerable. You're much more exposed. When you bring them together, the process and the security side of the house, you create something stronger, you create something much more resilient. So the core of this talk is going to be about how we can embed these things together so that resilience becomes a natural outcome. Now, it's often thought that breaches are due to technical failures, but 60%, and by the way, when I say 60%. This comes from the Verizon data breach investigation report. This is a report I think maybe every year or every 2 years Verizon create. And similar to the IBM cost of a data breach report, what they do is they take all of the investigations that they do, they take all of like the publicly accessible data as well, and then they basically generate this report about data breaches. And the Verizon data breach report tends to be a little bit more technical than the IBM one. IBM focus on the more commercial side of the house. Verizon has some commercial stuff in it, but it really like tries to focus on like the root cause of breaches as well. So in this report in 2025, they said that 60% of breaches are caused by people. So we're talking there like, misuse, mistakes, poor decision making, that type of thing. So that begs the question, if 60% of breaches are caused by people, where do people interact the most with IT? Well, they interact the most with IT within the ITSM processes that you've set out. The change approvals, the incident handling, the access requests, a bunch of other stuff, right? If we can embed security into these processes, we can help reduce the human risk element. Now, if you then think back to the first slide where I said there's a bunch of vulnerabilities, these vulnerabilities are now becoming more and more, and they are now more available to be utilized against an organization, and the cost of that is getting higher, and 60% of the breaches that occur are happening because of a human aspect, and we've then tied back the human aspect to where they interact with IT the most. A priority needs to be this. It needs to be embedding this because this is part of the kill chain, right? So over the next few slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 3 areas that I mentioned: incidents, change, and access. And each section has 3 slides. We've got like a problem slide where I talk a little bit about the problems that I'm seeing. I then give an example of a problem and the reason why it's a problem. And then I go on to some, again, simple strategies on like how you can integrate security into the mix to make sure that these things are no longer problematic. There is no rocket science here. It's all table stakes, but I would not be able to stand here and give you the table stakes if every organization in the world was doing the table stakes, right? Now, it's super common to feel like a ticketing system is there and has been designed specifically for noise. And like, you know what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about like password resets, my printer's not working, and the dreaded Teams no longer works. These things just create noise all the time, but not all incidents are equal. And frankly, incidents are sometimes where you see the first manifestation of risk, where you see the first manifestation of like a breach. If you start to see like repeated login failures from like a strange location, or there's a reported strange attachment, that is the first time that you're seeing a potential risk within your environment or a potential breach that could occur. It's really important that we don't treat all tickets the same. When I say the same, I'm talking log, assign, close, right? Obviously. Because you miss an opportunity to act. Triage must be security aware. It must be embedded with triggers that flag risk patterns and then escalate those to the relevant people. Now, no one in this room is going to admit that they would send a SOC analyst to go and fix a printer, hopefully. But more often than not, I'm pretty certain that security incidents have been routed through the exact same process that your IT incidents have gone through. Because everybody does it, right? Obviously, as you get more mature, it's obvious, and you start thinking about buying different products and whatever, and you've got different MSPs and stuff like that helping you with different things, but most organizations do this. It all gets routed through the same process. And when you start to think, going back to Verizon for a second, when you start to think that the average time to identify and contain a breach is 227 days according to them, 9 months. If the first time you're seeing something is like a strange ticket, like, hey, I've got a strange problem, and you're not asking yourself the question like, hey, could this be a problem? Could this be something security related? Then you're basically losing the opportunity to act as quickly as possible and basically shorten that 227 days to a time that seems much more manageable, right? So how does this manifest itself? Here's an example, right? A user reports that their laptop is now acting a little bit strange. It's running slow. It gets logged. IT look at it, they mark it as a performance issue, they re-image the device, it gets sent out because the objective of that team is to ensure that that person is back to work as soon as possible. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then 2 weeks later, the security operations center turns around and goes, hey, I can see a command and control. I can see that there's something beaconing in this re-imaged laptop. Oh, and by the way, it's got like elevated privileges, access to blah, 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 and it can do whatever it wants to do. This isn't like a made-up story, right? I can point to investigations that I've been involved with for years that this has happened. Nobody is dealing with these types of things. Where are the problems? The problems are that there's no security triage in the incident flow. No malware scan's been run. No one's checked for any unusual network traffic. There's been no correlation across the users. We'll talk about correlation in a moment. And the resolution has been focused on fixing the machine, right? We need to fix the machine so this person can get back to work because time is money and we need this person to work. It's quite topical in Lansweeper at the moment because we've just set our goals for the year. And it's my belief that bad KPIs drive bad outcomes. Now, it's the same everywhere. If you set a KPI that's about getting somebody back to work and not taking into account the rest of the objectives of the business, you're in a problematic state. We need to be focusing on understanding the root cause here. So what's the way to avoid this? What do we do? Again, simple measures, right? We need to stop closing security issues as normal IT issues. And we need to embed security thinking right from the first steps of an incident. Every issue needs to pass through a very simple but deliberate set of questions. And questions are a theme in this presentation, right? You're basically needing to ask yourself, could this be malicious? Is this unusual? And has this happened somewhere before? And has it happened recently? And you need to make sure that you document this, even if the answer is no. You want to be forcing the people to ask this question and saying no every single time. That's the hope, right? You want the no. But if the answer is yes, and frankly, if the answer is just maybe, it shouldn't be treated like a normal IT issue. It should be flagged, escalated, and investigated by the right people, obviously. Now, it's also incredibly important that we correlate incidents. So when I speak to organizations about incident correlation, especially again at my time back at IBM, everyone said, yeah, we correlate incidents. And when you then dug a little bit deeper about what do you mean by correlate incidents, well, this person, when they close a ticket, they'll remember that ticket, and then when they go to another ticket, then they'll remember the ticket before, and they're correlating that in their head. It's like manual correlation. There's no like cross communication between these people though, right? That isn't correlation. That's trying to be lucky, basically. At the end of the day, like one particular problem isn't really a problem, but if you have 5 of the same thing happening in a similar place, that could be a threat pattern. Now, what I'm trying to do here today is I'm trying to make sure that the things that I'm saying like shouldn't make a huge difference to the process that you put in place. I think it's really important that we continue to run things as best we can, because degradation in service typically, whether it's the right thing to do, is not allowed within most organizations, right? So what we have to do in this scenario is we need to reframe slightly. This is about catching things in plain sight, and it's about proving that the processes that you got in place actually do the job that they should do. If you turn around to somebody and said, like, we're the first line of defense, we're the people who should be identifying where problems are there. Oh, and by the way, like we have. And then you're tracking not just against the number of tickets you've closed on a monthly basis, but you're tracking against, well, we've closed this many tickets and we've identified this many problems, and this is then escalated into this that the security operations team or the security team have dealt with. That's a KPI that you can drive towards, right? Now, depending on your maturity, and obviously we're in a whole like bubble of like vendors today, depending on the tools that you use and what's part of your ecosystem, all of this can be done automatically. It can all be done utilizing AI, I'm sure. But it's It's about ensuring that you understand that this needs to be done so that if anything ever was to happen where the AI doesn't work or they decide that they're going to do something else for the day, that you know that this is what needs to be done. At the end of the day, accurate data, incident correlation, and strong triage gates is what's going to make the difference here when you think about IT and security together. Changes are a fact of life, and probably a bigger fact of like IT life. You've got upgrades, patches, you've got new services being deployed, upgrades, the list. We could spend the whole day listing things out when we talk about change, right? But change is a huge source of risk. Every single year, without fail, Verizon in their data breach report will say, I say every single year, I still can't remember if it's 1 or 2 years that they release it. Every single year or every other year, without fail, they turn around and they say that that one of the leading causes of data breaches is due to misconfiguration, due to error, and due to I wrote it down here, is due to misconfiguration, error, and rush changes. That's what they say. So, when we think of a firewall rule change, when we think of a server being rebuilt, when a new service is being deployed, we need to be asking ourselves, is security part of the change? Now, everybody in this room will say, yeah, security is part of the change. But often, honestly, you may think it is. We'll talk about this in a moment, but it really isn't. Changes get approved, again, based on objectives like uptime, cost, delivery. No one is asking typically a new vulnerability is being introduced because a lot of the time, new equals good, right? You will be promised, for sure, by your security teams, yeah, we're checking all of this. I worked for Visa in a team called the Project Assurance Team, and our responsibility was testing the changes before the changes happened. And I have one question. Do you know how many changes were happening? Do you think we were able to keep our promises? No. It is incredibly difficult to keep up with the change of a modern business, especially now. As we started, back then, Visa were only thinking about Agile. You start thinking about Agile now, holy crap, like this is serious. So testing in change is very, very difficult and also slows things down. If any of you are like project managers here and you've had like a project that has been put through the ringer from a security perspective because it's considered highly critical, and have felt the pain of like projects being slowed due to security. Nobody is testing the validators, right? Yeah, compliance, fine, but compliance is lower than the baseline. People are trusting that things are going right, and quite often they don't. In my opinion, change management should have its own classification of risk. We talk about SQL injection. For me, change is like risk injection, because every single change is a change that can introduce risk, for sure. So the example here, this isn't a rare problem. This is super common, and you can replace some of these words. And I'll give you an example in a moment of a situation that I was in. But a server is migrated to the cloud, and the change is logged, and it is reviewed and is approved immediately because it's just infrastructure. I mean, what does that actually even mean? I hear that all the time. Oh, this is just infrastructure. Yeah, we can accept this change. I genuinely have no idea what people mean by this is just infrastructure. Maybe they think, with the cloud, shared responsibility model with AWS, blah, 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 we're protected. No, you're not protected. Please look at the change better. Anyway, it's just a bugbear of mine. During the migration, they open up a port on the firewall to ensure that they can test something in particular. And lo and behold, when it gets deployed, the firewall rule is never changed. And then 6 weeks later, an attacker sees this open port, this opportunistic attacker sees the open port, gains remote access, pivots within the environment, and then they exfiltrate sensitive data, and your company is, in front of the ICO. There is no security impact assessment here. There's been no mandatory validation after the change was completed, and you're not monitoring for any misconfigurations after you've deployed. I don't think I need to ask the question when the last time was that changes happened without security really signing off on them, because this is a real problem for everybody. I don't think I've seen an organization do this in a way that like encourages like collaboration properly between teams. And I said before, like you could change this with anything. I had the honestly the pleasure, it was super exciting to run for about 4 years a team that focused on transport cybersecurity. So we were testing the security of cars, planes, trains. We did some satellite stuff as well. It was super cool. And a lot of the time when we were testing cars, what was happening was they were on the factory line. And whilst they were on the factory line, some of their ECUs in the car were having a debug like mode switched on. I can't remember the name of the protocol off the top of my head. And then when they came off of the factory line and then they actually ended up on the shop floor, that debug protocol was there and available and you could like query. And some of the times, I said before, vulnerabilities are not equal, right? So some of the time it was just being able to like understand a little bit more about the ECU, map it a little bit, whatever. But sometimes it was incredibly dangerous. In one particular incident, we were able to use this protocol to install malware onto the infotainment unit, which disabled key, they were called ADAS features, Advanced Driver Assistance Service features, safety critical features. And then with cars, without that protocol turned on, enable it to self-propagate that malware to other vehicles. And by the way, that isn't other vehicles that are the same, because the infotainment unit in one car might be the same as the infotainment unit in a completely different car. So we were self-propagating malware across vehicles that were driving next to each other just because they decided we're going to turn this debugging protocol on, and they never checked to see if it was turned off. For everybody here, probably security isn't a matter of life and death, but in that situation it is, right? And this is change. So again, this isn't about slowing down. What I'm trying to do here is I'm enabling you to go off and continue making these changes at the breakneck speed that you're probably making them. But you need to be documenting and logging and ensuring that you understand what needs to be looked at after the fact. There are 3 simple elements here, right? So before the change is made, ask the right question. Does this open a new risk? Is there external exposure? You know, are there critical systems that are being impacted? We'll talk about criticality in a moment. And then if there is material risk, make sure that you're bringing security in so that they can model the threat, right? They can say, well, this is the potential. This is what could be done. If they have time, perfect, let them go off and do it. You know, it may delay you ever so slightly, but okay, like it may be acceptable, the small delay. If it's not, then we continue, but those things are logged. And then once the change is done, I beg of you, please, 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 please validate. Validate that the change has been done as was determined, as was agreed, and that the things that the security team have modeled are actually then looked at to ensure that you actually know whether or not the problem is there and you can go off and deal with it. Because the security team have already said if the problem is there, then this is what we can do to deal with it. You need to catalog all of these like threats, all of these risks. Cataloging is super important. I really want to ensure that we try and keep IT agile, right? But I also want to ensure that we stop breaches happening. Honestly, if you don't have like these types of security gates at the time of change, then you're relying on luck, and luck is not a control. Right, and now access. Now, when you think of risk, it's very easy to think about like incident as change as being like the be all and end all, but access, like what you can get access to, is a massive risk too. We just tend not to think about it because access is, from my experience, the number one way I've seen organizations fall down. Most environments I've seen, it's super, super easy to grant access to something. Fill out a form, a few button clicks here, you go off and get your manager approval who's super busy getting approvals from everybody else, and they click yes, 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 yes. And then you have access. The problem isn't the access, the problem is taking the access away. Over time, you know, you have users, they change roles, responsibilities, they get added a different project, and they accumulate and collect all of this access that they no longer need. And that's what I mean at the top by creep, the slow creep of risk. I'm talking here about privilege creep, right? When you add to the fact that there's all of these things being added to people's like access, all of these things that people can access, with the fact that a lot of the time they then never get deprovisioned, you end up in a position that every single day you're accumulating more and more. Now, I can tell you, as someone has a background in penetration testing and red teaming and has been like focused on trying to break into organizations, for me and the teams that I've worked with, we love nothing more than a dormant account. We love nothing more than excessive permissions, because those old access paths enable us a lot of the time to be able to go and do stuff that you never even thought was possible. Moving laterally within the environment is much easier through legitimate access than it is by utilizing zero-day exploits. It's just simple. So the example, here, like, access isn't like creeping quietly. You're opening the front door, right? You have an employee, they change department, they then get phished a number of months later, and because their access was never revoked, we now have a situation where that particular data that they shouldn't have had access to anymore is now accessible outside. Now, I think that now you've seen like the style of the presentation, the 3 slides per section, you may have thought that this was going to be like disgruntled employee or insider threat, which are risks, like, for sure. But what I want to talk about here is about how attackers are able to, what we call, live off the land, play with the cards that they've been dealt. So yeah, they've phished somebody, got some creds, but instead of then going in and like wrecking havoc across the environment, they're legitimately going through the environment and looking at what it is that they have access to and what it is that they can do and what it is that enables them to meet their objective. Living off the land is like a big part of the offensive side of cybersecurity. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can live off the land to your benefit as well in a moment. This isn't technical. This isn't a technical exploit. You could argue that the phishing, okay, there's some like technical aspect to it, fine, no problem. But this is purely human process failure. And this happens so much more than we'd like to admit. And as I say, in my years of doing penetration testing, like, this is the most common category of war story that I could spend hours over beers talking about. So, fixing this doesn't require reinventing the wheel. It doesn't require you like thinking incredibly hard. It's about tightening controls. It's about just understanding what is being approved and how long it's being approved for. Like, it's that simple. It starts with the front door, right? It starts when somebody asks for access. Requests need to be shaped, number one, with least privilege in mind. You only give them access to what they need. You only give them access to how long for. Does it align with their role and responsibility? And then we need to connect that with the kind of the real ownership too, like who owns the asset, who's responsible for the system. If nobody knows any answers to any of these questions, you sure as hell don't approve. You don't fail open, fail closed. No, you're not getting access. And finally, please don't by default give permanent access to anything. Like, all elevated access needs to expire, and then you should be reviewing periodically, right? You know, it could be periodic, it could be via a role change, it could be due to inactivity, whatever, but just review. Most organizations are not reviewing. These like small steps, right, reduce the attack surface. And that's silly to say because, like, I'm not saying anything crazy here, but reducing attack surface is the name of the game. This is what we have to do. Because it's a cat and mouse, right? You're never going to stop yourself getting breached. But 9 times out of 10, it's an opportune attacker that's looking at you and knocking on your door. It's somebody just trying the same thing that they know works. And if it doesn't work against you, they move on to the next. Okay, if there's a nation state or if there's like someone who's really going after you, you're screwed, right? You are screwed. But it's the opportune hackers that we're trying to protect ourselves against. And if I'm saying that the biggest way that I've ever got into organizations is through legitimate access, making sure that people have access to only what they need, I mean, that's a big step. So everything that I've talked about here, from incident change, access, it needs to live in the middle. It needs to live in the middle of cybersecurity and ITSM. In many organizations, though, these teams work separately. I spent a lot of time last year talking about how different silos, different teams need to come together and work together. In this situation, with your ITSM processes and the teams that manage this, you've got people who are dealing with uptime and SLAs, and your security team are dealing with threats and risks. But the real risk really is what lives in between these two. It's the intersection between them where the risk lies and where you can do something about it. I said this before, but security really does need the structure that ITSM is able to provide. And when I say structure, I'm talking about the defined workflows. I'm talking about like the consistent handling of stuff, the proper documentation of things. But ITSM also needs that security lens as well, the view on risk, because it's not all just about requests and changes and access, but some incidents are not harmless. They need to be dealt with in a proper manner. When teams share resource, data, context, incident patterns, access history, you can make better, smarter decisions. And this is how we move away from just doing ITSM and security to doing it together. Because if your teams are only meeting after a breach has occurred or a security incident has happened, then honestly, it's far too late. So what I want to do is I want to put 3 questions in your mind for when you go back to the office, whether it's tomorrow or on Friday, so that if you are answering these questions with, I'm not sure, you know that you've got something to think about. So the first question, do your incident workflows ask whether you've ruled out a security risk? I've worded this in such a way that it's not just, hey, is this a security risk? Yes, but it forces you to answer no. Are you answering no every single time where you don't think that this is a security risk? Are you relying on individuals to turn around and say that this was fine? Or are you monitoring that is actually happening? The second is security required to sign off on high-risk change? You're all going to say yes to me. But then I'll turn around to you and I'll say, okay, explain to me what high risk actually means. And if you pull out from your back pocket the dirtiest looking spreadsheet I've ever seen that has never been touched for 10 years, I'll tell you, you don't know what high risk is. You have no idea what high risk means. You need live data if that's how you're going to manage risk. If you're going to say high risk, critical risk, you need live data. It needs to be actionable. At the end of the day, if security isn't involved, you're making a blind bet, right? And then finally, I'll even pose the question, if your access requests do not auto-expire, you don't trigger periodic reviews, you are accumulating dormant accounts, you're accumulating excess privileges every single day, and one day you will be screwed. For sure. For sure. Final slide. So everything that I've talked about today, better incident triage, safer change approvals, tighter access controls, this stuff doesn't need you to go out and buy new products, services, whatever. Like, I am a big believer, as I said at the beginning, I'm not here to sell you anything. You do not need to go out and buy more stuff. You can, right? And yeah, it could improve, but you don't need to. What I've tried to do with this slide is I've put like a few boxes on here of like things that you might recognize within your own environment, right? Like, I can hazard a guess that some of you will have Jira, CrowdStrike, some of you may be a Lansweeper customer. Even like if you're not going to publicly admit it to anybody here, you're also going to have a spreadsheet that is available that is going to be part of the process somewhere along the line. Your problem here isn't the tooling, right? It isn't the fact that you have all of these tools. It's the fact that you treat them as a point solution, right? It's the fact that when you ask a question of one of these things, it is doing it in isolation of the rest of the environment. This is like mega important. You need to have an ecosystem of tools and platforms, not just a point solution, because it's when these things come together, it's when these things are blended together that you really do get to this world where you can ask a question of your entire context and you get to the point where you are able to answer the question to the best of your ability. You are able to live from the cards that you've been dealt. You can now live off the land, because joining these things together allows you, for example, allows your ITSM to flag suspicious incidents. It helps you to correlate login data from, directory services. It allows you to see recent changes. It allows you for your AV and the logs from your AV to turn around and say, oh, there's been some access here. Honestly, my opinion, resilience isn't bought, it's built. But more importantly, it's built intentionally. You need to intentionally join everything that you have together in function of getting to a place where you can do what the attackers are doing and you live off the land. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. By the way, I know that I didn't speak about AI. Genuinely, I can speak to you about AI if you want. If that's the question that you want to ask, I'm more than happy to. Feel free to ask any question you want. I am also around for the next 2 days, so if you don't feel comfortable asking the question publicly, feel free. And even if you don't want to speak to me, although I never encourage you to scan QR codes, even though I've got a QR code on my back, this QR code I assure you goes to a place apparently where you can ask some questions as well, and we can respond to them after the fact. So thanks very much.